It is my pleasure, and it is the pleasure of NIF to introduce Dr. Merce Crosas, who is the Director of Product Development for the Institute of Quantitative Social Science, IQSS, at the Harvard University. Dr. Crosas joined IQSS in 2004. At that time, it was called the Harvard MIT Data Center, as the manager of the Dataverse Network project, which she will be talking about today. This product development team at IQSS actually includes not only the Dataverse project, but also the Murray Research Archive and the statistical and web development projects, the Open Scholar and Zealing. Before joining IQSS, she worked for 5 years in the software and biotech industry. Initially as a software developer and later on as director of IT and software development. Prior, she was at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, where she completed her doctoral thesis. Afterwards, she was a postdoctoral research fellow and software engineer with the radio astronomy division. So Dr. Crosas holds a PhD in astrophysics from Rice University, and she graduated with a BS in physics from the Universitat de Barcelona in Spain. Actually, that would be Barcelona, right? In any case, I would now like to turn this over to Dr. Crosas. Welcome.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully all of you can see it and hear me. So I will get started and try to do. You hear me okay? It's all fine, Anita? Yes. So started. I plan to keep the talk not very long and have more time for discussion, for questions and discussion if possible. So, the first part of the talk, we'll discuss about data sharing and replication, and then I will talk about the Dataverse Network as a solution to data sharing. In 1995, Gary King, the director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, where we developed the Dataverse Network, in a paper on replication, stated that the replication standard holds that sufficient information exists with which to understand, evaluate, and build upon a prior work if a third party can replicate the results without any additional information from the author. Why is this important? When we have the published work, the results from research work are usually the final claims. And it's just the tip of the iceberg of the entire research work that has been done and that supports those claims. So the data, the code, the metadata, other additional material is not often shared, and that makes it a lot more difficult to validate the results. So what do I mean? This replication standard, you would think is though to follow in the sense that even when the information is shared among others, it is hard to exactly replicate the results of work if there is not enough interaction with the author or with the research team. But I still believe that it's an important standard to try to follow, to make it a standard, because it does increase the likelihood of verifying previous work and validating science in the long run. So when we talk about sufficient information, what do we mean? In this diagram can be confusing or hard to read just because you see that there are a lot of different parts of it that describe the workflow or all the components that go into a research project. we're gonna give it some color and maybe it makes it easier then to interpret. So we have in yellow the data items or the data objects, and those are the original data. It could be some external data, some data that you got, field data, lab data, survey data, depending on field or discipline you're talking about. There are scripts of code that are running to analyze the data, to clean that data, and you combine it, the data sets to get aggregated data. Finally, the one that you use for the publication. At the same time, in blue, you have all the context or the documentation that goes with the data. And that can be code books in case for a lot of the social science and for um, a, in other cases, maybe in the form of variable metadata. You would have all the information those in documents like the code books. You would have some descriptions of the workflows. You might have notes, notebooks, um, discussions, and all part of that context that is important or is relevant in order to replicate the results. And as I said before, the actual results of the research products are just a small part, right? Just the tip of the iceberg, a small part of the entire process. So you might have some of the claims in blog postings, in some visualizations you created or presentation, but more often just the publication. So we want to make an effort to be able to allow or to facilitate the access to everything else that will that has been part of the research process and helps to um, understand the claims and the result in the publication. And if we look at this diagram for likelihood to replicate, we see that as it is obvious, right, that if the leads you share them, less likely will be to replicate or validate the results that you're claiming. But it's also important to know that even when you share everything over time, there are issues with either the, the software that you had used or the formats, the file formats you've used. So putting some effort into preservation or making what you share in formats and well, with enough documentation that later they can be reformatted and interpreted in a longer term, well, a long time when the, the software packages or the languages that you use in your code are obsolete is important. So all things are things to take into account, things that we well, were a part of the basis of building the Dataverse network, as you will see later. So the things can happen when we don't share data. We see based on some issues that they have been reported. In this case, this is from an article from a year ago in New York Times, but there are other cases like that. The claims were not supported by the original data. There's been, based on that, several studies to see what is the impact of sharing data and what is that researchers are doing in terms of sharing or not sharing data. Well, now we is that another study, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of studies that support the claim here. But this one is interesting about what well the good things that can happen if we share data. So in this case, the study says that we found that cancer clinical trials which share the microarray data were cited about 70% more frequently than clinical trials which do not share that type of data. So no, well, if you make your data accessible, not only the, the data sets themselves will be cited more often, but even the original publication that have used that data sets, at least based on that study, would be also cited or would be more credible and probably cited more often. So what is that we did here at IQSS in order to provide a solution that would help with making data sets more accessible? We built 6 years ago the Dataverse Network. Well, the Dataverse Network is a repository, an open source that allows you to, well, researchers to share the data, and it takes care of the long-term preservation and takes care of good archival practices, while researchers can still keep control or can own the data, continue owning the data and administrating it, managing it, and getting recognition for it. Here at Harvard, we host a Dataverse network for social science data that is actually getting expanded now in collaboration with the Harvard Library. So it is open to other data sets from other disciplines and domains. There are now almost 500 Dataverses. I think this slide might be a little bit out of date. There are more than 50,000 studies and 700,000. Also, within this year, the astronomy department and the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics adopted the Dataverse network to use it for astronomy data, and is now still in the early stages. But again, together with the Harvard Library, it's getting expanded to provide a resource for sharing data sets in astronomy. In neuroinformatics, I believe that sharing data for the long-term access has similar challenges that we found in with the social science data sets, and obviously there would be also in astronomy data. So first, we take care of the incentives to share, and I talked about some of them based on these studies about increasing the citation to work. There is also hard to define what is the unit of data citation. Need to make it easy to provide sufficient metadata or documentation about the data so the data can be understood by others after one and can be reused. We need to take care of what happens with the when software and formats get obsolete. Uh, Also provide ways to make the data discoverable, and the continued challenge that the size of data keeps increasing. How do we uh, handle larger and larger data sets? So in terms of recognition and credit, or building in incentives for the researcher to upload the data in a Dataverse, we made the deposit, well, the process such that the researcher or data producer still keep control of his or her data, and also can well integrate his or her own data with website, website. Um, and in this case, you can see for a research project or an organization that has some branding and a presence, they can create a Dataverse in our Dataverse network and just brand it, customize it, and administrate it. And it just this virtual archive, but they have control of it, even though the data sets are stored in a repository, well, in a centralized repository where the data are archived and preserved for long-term access. So another thing that helps with the incentives and also helps define how you're going to make that data accessible long-term, how are you going to make it accessible from publication is providing a formal data citation. So the Dataverse network generates a data citation as soon as you upload, create a study and upload a data set. The data citation is based on a paper by Mike Allman and Gary King from 2007. And it has the components, it has all the proper attributions or the authors or data producers, right, as part of the citation, the title, a persistent identifier that is basically a persistent URL, and the Dataverse currently uses handles for that. DOIs are based on handles, so it's the same idea. You have a URL that will always resolve to the study and that data set, even if the hosting environment changes. And then there is another component that is the universal numerical fingerprint, which is basically a hash on the data values, not the metadata, it doesn't depend on the format. So basically we convert the data set into a canonical format, and then from there we calculate this fingerprint, and that helps you verify that when you download that data set, the UNF is the same as the one in the citation. The data has not changed, basically. And in that citation, we also include the version. I will show you later that the Dataverse supports versioning of a study. So within the citation, you could, as an option field, you could include the version to know which version of that data set had been used for a certain publication or for a given claim. Well, how does it work? So the Dataverse Network is the software, the repository, and it's installed in either in a large institution, or there is one installation for an entire discipline or domain, like in the case of astronomy, right? And that makes it very scalable, because within one Dataverse you can create as many Dataverses as you want, and each one is their individual archive that can be branded and customized and owned by a different researcher or research group. And again, all the data still stored in the main central repository, but the management of the data and the curation is done at each Dataverse. And each Dataverse also can be configured in different ways to use different metadata for the studies, to describe the data, to set different permissions on each data set. So there is a lot of flexibility, and again allows for scalability. Within a Dataverse, you can create studies, and the studies can be organized in collections. And each study has the data files and the documentation or metadata about the data. I mentioned before, we support versioning, and that would mean that contributors, curators, or administrators of a Dataverse can create a study and can, as a form, in a form of self-curation, they can enter the description that could include um, the title, the authors, an abstract, the methods that were used. There are more than 100 fields based on the DDI schema, and some of the fields are actually can be customized based on the discipline. So, but only the title and the persistent ID are required. So that study goes into review. And when it's released is when you have a formal data citation that you can use from your publication. Uh, once if there you have then some changes or updates in the data or the metadata, you can create a draft, review that draft, then create a new version. And now in this case, if you have uploaded a new file, the UNF will be different, and the data citation will show that there is a new version of the study. We build APIs to be able to connect the publication data more easily. Here, in the case of astronomy, this is from publication on the CO survey in the Milky Way. And if you notice here, there is the archive data link that would provide the list of all the data sets found in the Dataverse network on astronomy data that relate to that publication. So you can go easily from the publication to the data. So what a researcher data producer can do with the Dataverse? He deposits the data and enters metadata, gets in return a data citation with this persistent URL that will be important for to use in a publication. Can brand the data page, controls the access to the data, so can set the terms of use, can set it to no access in the sense that only can be the study can be searched, but you cannot using R for providing a statistical analysis of some of the data sets. Basically, as I said, I keep it short to allow for more questions and discussion, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you. Anita,
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I just unmuted myself. Let me unmute all of the participants. Hang on just a second. Okay, so now everyone should have rights for their microphones. Maybe I'll ask one question to...
My screen, should I stop?
Oh, no, I think it's fine. Someone might have questions subsequently. But I wanted to maybe start us off with just asking some, personal questions for you. So from the perspective of NIF, in the neuroinformatics, we care very much about structuring of data, especially data methods, because we are very concerned about tracking resources, tracking reagents throughout the literature.
Right.
And so, I would like to have you maybe elaborate a little bit on, other ontologies used, structuring of any of your metadata. I mean, you're saying that in your previous slide, you actually had a good explanation for the Dublin Core and some of these other very generic standards. But of course, Dublin Core doesn't tell you anything about specifically within a particular type of data.
Right.
What are the sorts of things that are in there? And it's, we found that it was really insufficient for being able to really capture the complexities of neuroscience data. So if you could just sort of start by addressing some of that, and then I'm starting to also see questions. So
I agree. Dublin Core is not sufficient. It's important to support it so that you can exchange easily the high-level description with other systems. But the DDI is a lot more extensive, and it supports. I mean, this project started mostly focusing on social science data sets. A lot of them were surveys, election data, other data that were in tabular formats using statistical packages. And the DDI has very extensive fields of schema for describing this type of data files and with all the description and labels about every variable that will be used in those data files. And so it has ways of, there is a new version of the DDI code book. Instead of the code book, that it's more that is used more in the social science data set. It has the DDI workflow that right now we're not supporting, but it's relatively new, and it's a big change from the metadata schema that we have. But it would support more for this type of a more flexible workflow that would work for your type. I think for your type of data, or more, or just it could be adapted to other ontologies. We've been. I mean, I guess the short answer is that we do not support other ontologies, but on the other hand, that the DDI has ways to extend with custom metadata fields within a discipline. And we've been in conversations with medical school here and with other groups that that are associated with the hospitals here at the Harvard hospitals that are taking these custom fields and use the control vocabulary the standard control vocabularies to integrate with the ontology. So basically, we provide the infrastructures to allow you to customize it with your ontology. But I cannot give you an example. They're looking into that, how to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Shreejoy is asking, can we think of the data going into Dataverse as being heterogeneous collections of data?
Yes, definitely. Do you have an example of what um, of what type of heterogeneous collection you would think of?
He is typing.
Okay.
Okay, so heterogeneous as opposed to interoperable data sets is what he's thinking.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be accurate.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying is basically that the data themselves are not searchable. So you wouldn't be able to answer the question, how many males versus females, for example, would be present in this particular data set or across data sets without downloading all of the individual ones. And I think that's the
Yeah.
uh,
So
that's the thing.
the
But you do
the
have
derivative in this type of data sets, the actual the labels or the descriptions of the data is searchable. That's all indexed, but the actual data values are not. It is now.
right.
Um, in part, we thought I mean, unless we support, well, we store the data set themselves in a relational database that you can do useful queries. It's hard to see how searching the data values would give you very relevant results, you know?
Um, okay, well, we can certainly leave that. Well, I think Srijoy's uh, life work up to now has been in searching some of those data values out of literature. So
Oh,
this is, I think many people do this, and including NIF.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but okay,
yeah.
so Mary
I
Ann.
think that's true that if we've discussed with some groups, I mean, we're continue developing the software and we started with what it was again more required and basic important for social science data sets, but we're expanding right to other groups and we think of well ways of be able to if we, in the long run we want to merge different data sets or compare them or do searches across them in a more meaningful way. If we could do the storage in a different way and be able um, to do queries of the actual data values. Yeah. So yeah, I would be very interested in seeing how this is done in neuroinformatics and see how we could apply that to our data set.
Okay, great. I'd be happy to talk to you offline about this also, but I think we should get back to some of the other questions. So Marianne asks, would you say that the community has agreed upon the optimal way to assign identifiers to data? It seems like different groups recommended different identifier systems, example DOIs for
Right.
the California Digital Library System.
I think well we've been uh, offering some effort to try to set some agreements and standardize it with through NICE or also on the data side. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it's an international organization that is trying to also establish standards for data citation and see if the persistent identifier what it should be. But on the other hand, we don't think that handle and DOIs are that different, and as long as it is a persistent URL that is well supported, um,
Mm-hmm.
and that the data citation itself provides an attribution and recognition to the data producers or the data owners or original researchers, it is fine. So that's why we follow what it was published in the Alman King paper because the more important thing is the structure of the data citation and the fact that there is a persistent identifier, and when
Mm-hmm.
possible, there is a hash that fingerprint that helps verify the data set hasn't changed.
Oh, okay. So Jonathan, Marianne says thank you. So Jonathan is asking about cross-cultural studies and cross-species studies. How have you been handling those? I'm sure not. He could potentially elaborate, or he could just turn on the microphone.
Data sets support some of the quantitative and social sciences. So if you could elaborate. I haven't seen examples, but I'm not sure what you would see the challenge on that, and what would be the way to support it. I mean, again,
the reason why I brought it up is what Sridhar asked about heterogeneous data sets, and as I was browsing through the site and looking at some of the data that was posted, it seemed, and it sort of relates to Anita's question, it seemed that most of the data posted was sort of in a single spreadsheet from perhaps one study. But for example, if you're studying the effects of an environmental stressor in rodents and in mice, or different environmental stressors in the same species, could you have all of that data set within one Dataverse, or is the Dataverse really granular in terms of it's one particular experiment data, and then you have to make multiple uploads for every related but different slightly experiment?
Understanding the voice was breaking, but if I understood correctly, I mean the software itself, the Dataverse, allows for any data file to be uploaded. Data can be can have a mix of studies of very different nature, and within a study, and you could have multiple files, data files of that are part of that study, but they are very different formats and in different nature, and you can categorize them. But so they don't. One data file doesn't not necessarily relate to the other. They are not connected in the repository, but only in the form that they are part of the same study and part of the same Dataverse. So it allows for a lot of flexibility, and it's up to you how you organize it and what data you choose to upload. It's just that for some data formats that are originally in a statistical package format, statistical formats like SPSS and Stata, then as it is now, we provide additional processing for those and add value to them. We plan to do that with other types of data files, like for astronomy files, so we can do that for their formats in feeds formats, right? And it would be possible to do that for other formats in other more typical in other disciplines. But I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. I understand the last part of it. So, Anita, I don't know if we would.
Okay, I think that. Okay, so Jonathan has said, can you perform data and analysis between Dataverses?
No, the data analysis, the statistical analysis is per data file within a study. It's not across. I mean, you can compare it from one Dataverse to another, but you're not performing. You cannot merge two data sets and perform analysis across them.
Okay, and I think Srijoy was also still typing. Jonathan, thanks you. Now muted.
Yes.
Okay, and Srijoy was typing a question. So, More questions. Oh, no more questions there. Okay, so Sridhar, thanks you. I actually have a couple of kind of more general questions for you. And this is just with your experience in Dataverse. Have you had any issues with traditional journals basically considering the data published in Dataverse as already published, so therefore not novel? So I've heard of this, but we have never experienced it in NIF specifically. So I wonder, since you have probably a lot more experience in this field, maybe you could address that for a little bit.
So you mean they think that the data is not a data set, for example, is not originally, it could not be considered as original publication?
Yes.
Or?
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the journals, we work with quite a bit of journals, and we actually now have a project with the open journal system to integrate with publishing systems to be able to deposit data in the Dataverse when you are submitting a paper at the same time that you're submitting a paper to the journal. But the journals we work with, they use the Dataverse for a given journal for replication data of that publication, and they don't consider the data as the publication itself. It is the publication, and then they refer to the data set as the complementary
Mm-hmm.
data to support the article. So
So,
there hasn't been that issue of, I mean, maybe sometimes the data that data set has been used for other publications, but that has not been an issue or seen as a problem.
oh, okay, that's great. So Sridhar is also asking, is depositing the data into Dataverse becoming mandatory by those particular journals that you're working with?
The ones we work with here, they haven't yet made it mandatory, but they very strongly recommend that. What we've seen in some of the economics journals that we work with, for example,
Mm-hmm.
practically everybody does. Uh, so they upload the data. We were defining now use cases for about maybe 100 to 200 journals that are part of our pilot project. This is a project funded by the Sloan Foundation. And we're defining now the workflows, and in some cases they say that they will make it mandatory, but in most cases they make it optional.
Oh, great. So Khalid was also asking if you can please give examples of one or two journals.
Yeah, definitely. How do you want, what is the best way to give the example? So there is one here that is part of the Kennedy School, that it's economics, statistics and economics review. Uh, I have several. I mean, from the top of my, I can list them and send them to you from the top of my head. I don't remember all the names.
He is typing, and he is typing thank you. Okay. All right, that makes sense. Okay, so um, now when you set up the Dataverses, these component Dataverses, are these largely, or are they actually being set up for individual journals? Are they being set up for topics?
No, so there are all these different options that you can set. I mean, setting up a Dataverse, it just means to go to a button and create a new Dataverse and just fill out a very short form about the name of the Dataverse and all this, and then that's it. You can start uploading the data there, right? You're creating your space, your data page, and you can do it as a for individual researchers. So I would say that most of our Dataverses are for individual researchers, and what they want to do is have a link from the website to a Dataverse to just make the data available there for the work. And then other Dataverses are for journals, yes. Other Dataverses are for a small archive or research group that just, well, again, wants to make that data available or wants to encourage basically reuse of the data that they've been developing or analyzing. And others sometimes are just departments in an institution or so that they just want to make data of their contributors available. So there are several options. And again, it's very flexible to configure it and render it as you want it and with the type of data that you want. So that's part of was part of the initial goal, that we wanted to make it very generic and flexible to allow any data, but for that reason, then it doesn't have very specific functionality for just one given discipline only, right? It's more
Right.
generic.
That's always the issue, right? How much do you spend in terms of standardizing, but every step that you take in terms of standardization, then you're excluding a lot of things. So I understand. I mean, we struggle with the same.
Yeah, and the important thing is to think that it doesn't need to substitute a database that is very specific again to a type of data, right? For the like it would be in the case of the Gem Bank or some other systems that would do a very good job of treating only one type of data. But this is more of a general repository for making it easier to find and make it more accessible and follow standards for and sharing that data and citing that data and making the link from publications to data sets.
Okay, fabulous. Are there any other questions? Okay, Khalid is... Okay, so Khalid is asking about how about the format for citing the data in Dataverse? Do you recommend any particular format?
So the data, I mean, the data citation is actually generated by the Dataverse when you deposit a data file. So the format is given to you, and it follows. I mean, depends how specific you want the format to be, but the structure of the data citation is given to you automatically.
That's actually very good. Very, very useful. So hopefully then Khalid says thank you. Yeah, that's something that I had often thought about, because the text mining algorithms are much better at picking up those things that they expect to see, as opposed to those things that are within some edit distance or some such. Okay, wonderful. Sorry, so one other kind of big generic question, unless somebody else has something specific. So I have a generic question, again, coming from NIF, which is a repository. We search lots and lots of different kinds of data sets, and we try to search within the data wherever possible. Of course, we search whatever we're given. But I'm wondering, have you thought about potentially being able to, open up the back end, shall we say, or open up an API for someone else to actually build a search into the actual data? And, is that something that you're thinking about?
No, we did that this year actually, and we have a search API and a get API to be able to search all the data directly. I mean, for another system, be able to search the data and get the data files, as long as they have access to the actual data file, if it's made public.
But I thought that the API, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, so maybe please correct me if I am wrong, but I thought that the API was there to search the metadata only. Is that not correct?
Well, yeah, the description, yeah, the descriptive metadata and basically the header information of the file and every. But you mean to open to the data value to the data files themselves?
Yep.
Your
Mhm.
Okay. Well, the thing is that that API allows you to then download all those files and be able to, if you wanted to, then index them. In terms of doing, I mean, you could go on. The API allows you to find everything and then find get to all the data files, and you could perform the search there. But yeah, if you would think of more opening to just do a query, well, an API that would just get, I guess, all the index files for all the data values. We would need we could work on that for you if we're interested in that.
Okay. Well, I'm
Yeah,
just sort of
yeah,
thinking out loud here, and just seeing if you
yeah.
basically had
I think
considered
there would
these
be
things.
ways of doing it is what we provide now, but would not be the more efficient way. So there would be other things we could do if there were of interest and collaborating with other systems, be able
Hmm.
to, yeah, to access more easily the data storage. Again, the only thing is with the access with the limited, well, with the restrictions that might be set by the data owner.
Hmm.
So that's why the metadata is definitely all searchable, but
Hmm.
not all the data files are made public.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And one other kind of, again, a kind of a generic question. So there is data from subjects and patients, and a lot of that is now covered by HIPAA. Um,
Yes.
so when you have this kind of data and you say, okay, I would like to not share, or this unless somebody has, I
Yeah.
would like to share it, but there are these HIPAA requirements. So do you work with the data providers? Do you have a special area where data can be secure? Or do you only take the data that can be publicly accessed?
It's actually a very good question because we're working very, very much. I mean, this is one of our higher priorities now. We, as of now, you're agreeing when you're depositing data, you're agreeing that you have gone through the IRB approval, you have gone through HIPAA requirements, and so on. You're only uploading non I mean, not identified data,
Mm-hmm.
subject data, right? It has to be de-identified before. We're working on a 4-year project. It is actually an NSF funded project with a group here with the government and technology here at Harvard and the Harvard Law School and the computer science department to provide this secure environment and also a way, I mean, for files, data files with sensitive data, and a way to through the data analysis tool, a way to add to some extent like a noise through differential privacy or other algorithms to the data so that they can still be part of it can still be accessed or that you could still run some analysis but you would not have access to the identified data. You know what I mean?
Yep, I do. I do. Yeah, there are a lot of issues around HIPAA and
Right.
data.
That's why it is a big project that involves a lot of people and with groups in the medical school to see how we could provide. I mean, our goal is basically that you could still make the aggregated data or the meaningful information about the data still make that possible to share that among researchers,
Mm-hmm.
but provide a secure environment in the back end plus the way to access the data in a way that it doesn't identify the subjects.
Yep. Perfect.
And together with that, we're working on some defining set of privacy tags
Mm-hmm.
to be able to assess the sensitivity risk or the privacy risk for each data set.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for your time, Dr. Crosas, and thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. We're kind of heading towards the top of the hour. You're welcome to stay on and ask additional questions, but at this point I'm going to just sort of turn this over. But thank you everyone, and we will, Sri Joy is clapping. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.